My own mother looked me dead in the eyes in that courtroom and lied. She lied to a judge, under oath, with her hand on a Bible, about money that was never hers to begin with. But here's the thing about lies. They have a shelf life, and hers expired right there, in front of everyone.
My name is Jake. I'm 34 years old. I work in supply chain logistics. I drive a used Ford F-150. I make my own coffee every morning, and until about 2 years ago, I thought I had a pretty normal family. Not perfect, but normal. My grandparents, my dad's parents, were the kind of people who built something from nothing. Grandpa Roy grew up with dirt floors in rural Kentucky. He worked a factory job for 31 years. Never complained once. Grandma Helen cleaned houses on the side and saved every dollar like it might disappear overnight. They weren't wealthy by any big city standard, but they owned their home outright. They had a piece of land, about 12 acres, outside of town that Grandpa Roy bought in the early 1980s for almost nothing. And they had a savings account that, over 50 years of discipline and sacrifice, had grown to just over $280,000. To some people, that's not a fortune. To me, it represented a lifetime of sacrifice. To my parents, apparently it represented a target. Now let me explain my family dynamic, because this is important. My dad, his name is Gary, is Roy and Helen's only son. And my dad is complicated. He's charming. He's funny at parties. He tells the best stories. But underneath all of that, Gary never really grew up. He borrowed money from his parents more times than I can count. He had 3 failed business ventures, a car detailing shop, a vending machine route, and at one point, I kid you not, a food truck that lasted exactly 6 weeks. Every single time, Grandpa Roy quietly bailed him out. And every time my dad said, "I'll pay you back, Pop," he never did. My mom, Linda, isn't much different. She married my dad when they were both 22 and spent the next 3 decades enabling every single one of his bad decisions while quietly resenting everyone around her. She's the type of woman who keeps score. Every favor she ever did for anyone, she cataloged in her head like a receipt she planned to cash in later. I didn't see it clearly when I was younger. But I see it now. Here's what you need to understand. I was close with Grandpa Roy and Grandma Helen in a way that my parents never really were. Every summer growing up, I spent 2 or 3 weeks at their house. We'd go fishing. We'd work in the garden. Grandpa Roy taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, how to change brake pads, how to shake someone's hand and mean it. Grandma Helen taught me how to cook, how to budget, how to write a thank you note. They were the most grounded, decent people I've ever known. And as I got older, our bond only got stronger. When I was 22, I went through a rough breakup and a job loss at the same time. My parents told me to figure it out. Grandpa Roy drove 4 hours to take me to breakfast, and said 7 words that I've never forgotten. He said, "Hard times show you who you are." He paid for my first month's rent that year. No lecture. No strings. No receipt. He just did it because he loved me. When I was 30, Grandpa Roy got sick. It started as a heart issue, then complications, then a slow, painful decline that lasted about 2 years. During that time, I drove to see him every other weekend. My parents? They visited maybe 4 or 5 times total. And every single visit, I noticed something. They weren't really there to see him. They were there to talk about the house, the land, the savings. I heard my mom once ask Grandma Helen, while Grandpa was literally lying in a hospital bed down the hall, "Helen, have you two talked about getting your affairs in order?" Grandma Helen smiled politely and said, "We have a plan, Linda." My mom smiled back. But her eyes didn't. What nobody knew, except me, was that Grandpa Roy had already gotten his affairs in order. About 3 years before he got sick, he sat me down at his kitchen table. He made coffee. He pulled out a folder. And he told me that he and Grandma Helen had updated their will. He said he loved his son, my dad, But he knew Gary would blow through any inheritance in under 2 years. He'd watched it happen his whole life. So he made a decision. The house, the land, and the savings, it was all going to me. Not to Gary. Not to Linda. To me. He also set up a small trust, $30,000, specifically for my dad, structured so it could only be used for living expenses, paid out monthly, not as a lump sum. He looked at me and said, "Your father is going to be angry. Your mother is going to be angrier. But this is the right thing. You've earned it, son." They never came around. I didn't even know what to say. I just nodded. And I kept that secret for 3 years. Grandpa Roy passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Grandma Helen held his hand when he went. I was there. My parents were not. They showed up 4 hours later. My mom walked in, gave a 5-second hug to Grandma Helen, and within the first 20 minutes started asking about next steps. I watched my dad look around the house like he was taking inventory. I said nothing. I just helped Grandma Helen make tea and sat with her while she cried. The funeral was a week later. And the day after the funeral, I mean the very next morning, my parents sat down with Grandma Helen and asked her directly about the will. She told them calmly that everything had been arranged, that an attorney was involved, and that the estate would be handled properly. My dad pressed her. She held firm. That's when things got ugly. Over the next few weeks, my parents started calling me. At first, it was normal grief stuff. But then the calls shifted. My dad started saying things like, "You know, Pop wasn't in his right mind near the end." My mom started saying, "Helen is old and confused, Jake. She doesn't really understand what she signed." They were laying groundwork. I could feel it. And then one evening, my mom said something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Jake, if you know what's good for this family, you'll talk to Helen and convince her to split everything equally. The way it should have always been." I said, "Mom, I'm not going to do that." She hung up. 3 days later, I got a letter from an attorney. My parents were suing Grandma Helen. And they were suing me. I'm going to be honest with you. When I first read that letter, my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From disbelief. They were claiming that Grandpa Roy had been mentally incapacitated when he updated the will. They were claiming that I had unduly influenced him, meaning they were saying I manipulated a dying old man into changing his will to benefit myself. They were calling me a predator. My own parents. They were also claiming that Grandma Helen, at 79 years old, was no longer competent to manage the estate and were petitioning to have a third-party conservator appointed. In other words, they were trying to take control away from her entirely. I sat in my car in a parking lot for 20 minutes after reading that letter. And then I called my best friend, Marcus. Marcus is a straight shooter. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He listened to the whole story. And then he said, "Jake, you fight this. You fight this all the way to the end." I found an estate attorney named Patricia. She was in her late 50s, calm as still water, and had been doing estate litigation for over 25 years. She read through everything. She looked up from the documents and said, "They don't have a case. But that doesn't mean this won't be painful." She was right on both counts. Here's what my parents didn't know. Grandpa Roy, God bless him, was methodical. When he updated his will 3 years before he died, he didn't just sign a document. He recorded a video. He sat in front of a camera, with his attorney present, stated the date, stated his full name, and explained, in clear, coherent, detailed language, exactly why he was leaving his estate the way he was. He talked about his son's financial history. He talked about the failed businesses. He talked about the borrowed money that was never repaid. He talked about who showed up during the hard times and who didn't. And then he looked directly into the camera and said, "I am of sound mind. I am making this decision freely. And I am at peace with it." His attorney had certified the recording. A doctor had evaluated him at the time and documented his mental competency. When Patricia showed me this evidence, I exhaled for the first time in weeks. The hearing was on a Thursday. I remember the drive there. Gray sky, cold morning, bad coffee from a gas station. Marcus came with me. Grandma Helen came with her own attorney and sat on my side of the room. She was wearing a pale blue cardigan. Her hair was done neatly. She held her purse in her lap with both hands. She looked like exactly what she was, a 79-year-old woman who had worked hard her whole life and was now being dragged into a courthouse by her own son. My parents walked in together. My dad wouldn't look at me. My mom did look at me. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Their attorney went first. He was polished. He used words like cognitive vulnerability and isolation tactics and pattern of manipulation. He painted a picture of me as someone who had wedged himself between an old man and his family. He called it calculated. He called it cruel. I sat there and I listened to it all. And I kept my face still. Because I knew what was coming. My dad took the stand first. Under oath, he testified that his father had always planned to split the estate equally. He said it had been the family understanding for decades. He said the updated will was a shock and completely out of character. He said he believed his father had been confused and manipulated in his final years. The judge, an older woman named Judge Patricia Simmons, who had clearly seen everything in her career, listened carefully. She made a few notes. She asked a couple of clarifying questions. Then my mom took the stand. And this is where it really fell apart for them. My mom testified that she had been a devoted daughter-in-law. That she visited Roy frequently. That she had offered to help manage his finances. That she had always had a close relationship with both Roy and Helen. She said this with full confidence. She said it looking straight at the judge. Then it was our turn. Patricia stood up. She introduced the video. She played it in the courtroom. And the whole room changed. For 4.5 minutes, Grandpa Roy's voice filled that courthouse. Clear. Sharp. Deliberate. He explained his reasoning. He named names. He described specific incidents, loans not repaid, visits that never came, promises that evaporated. He wasn't angry in the video. He was just honest. At one point he said, and I'll never forget this, "My son is a good man in a lot of ways. But he has spent his whole life taking and expecting more. I love him. But love doesn't mean handing someone the tools to fail even bigger." I looked at my dad while the video played. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the table. He didn't move. Then Patricia introduced the medical documentation. Grandpa Roy's cognitive evaluation, conducted 2 months before the will was updated, showed no signs of impairment whatsoever. The physician's notes were detailed and clear. Then she introduced something else. Phone records. Specifically, the phone records showing how often each of us had called or visited Roy during the last 3 years of his life. My call log was extensive, dozens of calls, texts, visits documented through photos with timestamps. My parents' log was sparse. Very sparse. And then Patricia asked the judge to review one specific document. A log kept by Grandma Helen herself. Helen, apparently, had been keeping a quiet record for years. Dates and notes in a small spiral notebook. Who came for Christmas? Who called on Roy's birthday? Who showed up when he had his first heart procedure? It wasn't done out of spite. It was just Helen being Helen, organized, careful, methodical. But in that courtroom, it was devastating. Here's where the story takes a turn nobody in that room expected. My parents' attorney, trying to salvage things, pivoted. He argued that even if the will was valid, the property, the 12 acres of land, had been verbally promised to my father decades ago. He claimed there was an oral agreement between Roy and Gary that the land would pass to Gary when Roy died. It was a last-ditch move. And it might have created some noise. Except for one thing. The land wasn't in Grandpa Roy's name anymore. It had been quietly transferred, via a properly recorded deed, into my name 4 years ago. Before Roy got sick. Before any of this started. I hadn't even thought to mention it during the proceedings because it wasn't part of the estate. It was already mine. Patricia laid the deed on the table. The judge looked at it. Then she looked at opposing counsel. He had no idea. My parents had no idea. The land they had been fighting over in their heads, the land my dad had apparently been counting on for years, hadn't been Roy's to give since 2020. Roy had transferred it to me himself, legally, without any fanfare. And then kept cutting the grass on it like he always had. Because that was just who he was. The judge took a short recess. When she came back, she didn't waste time. She ruled swiftly and completely. The will was valid. The claims of undue influence were unsupported by evidence and contradicted entirely by the recorded testimony of the deceased. The petition for conservatorship over Grandma Helen was denied, firmly, with the judge noting that Helen had demonstrated clarity, coherence, and full legal capacity throughout the proceedings. And then Judge Simmons did something that courtroom observers apparently still talk about. She addressed my parents directly. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly, "This court has seen many estate disputes. Most involve genuine ambiguity. This one does not. The deceased was clear. The documentation is thorough. What this court finds most troubling is not the filing of this claim, but the nature of the testimony offered in support of it. Characterizing consistent absence as presence, and characterizing love as manipulation, is not a legal strategy. It is a character statement. I hope both parties will reflect on that." The room was completely silent. My mom's face went red. My dad stared at the table. Grandma Helen quietly squeezed my hand under the table. We walked out of that courthouse into cold November air. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Grandma Helen held my arm as we walked to the car. She didn't say much. She's not a big talker, Helen. But when we got to my truck, she turned to me and said, "Roy knew. He always knew. That's why he planned it so carefully. He didn't want you to have to fight. But he also knew you could." I didn't cry in the courthouse. I cried in that parking lot. My parents didn't speak to me for months after the ruling. My dad eventually sent a text, short, no apology, saying he hoped we could move past it someday. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. What I do know is this. I'm not going to carry bitterness about it. That's not what Grandpa Roy would have wanted. But I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. Some things change a relationship permanently. And this was one of them. A lot of people in these stories use the inheritance to do something flashy. I didn't. The house I kept. I'm renting it right now to a young family, a couple with 2 small kids, for below market rate because they reminded me of something Grandpa Roy once said. He said, "If you ever get more than you need, find someone who needs it, and close the gap a little." The 12 acres of land I haven't touched. I go out there sometimes on weekends. Walk the property lines. Sit where Roy used to sit. It still smells like him somehow. Like motor oil and pine needles. The savings, a portion of it I put into a small investment account for my own future. A portion I used to pay off my truck and a small amount of debt I had been carrying. And $15,000 of it I donated to the local food bank in Grandpa Roy's name. Because he would have done the same thing. Here's what I want you to take from this. Grandpa Roy didn't set things up the way he did out of cruelty. He set it up out of love. Real love. Not the kind that gives people whatever they want. The kind that sees clearly, plans carefully, and does what's right even when it's hard. He saw my dad for who he was, not who he wished he could be. He saw my mom for what she wanted. And he saw me. Not because I'm special. But because I showed up. I showed up when it was inconvenient. I showed up when there was nothing to gain. I showed up because I loved him. And in the end, that's the only currency that actually meant anything. My parents thought they could walk into a courtroom and rewrite history. They thought if they said the right words in the right order, in front of the right authority, the story would change. But Grandpa Roy had already told his story. Clearly. On camera. Under no one's influence but his own conscience. And when that recording played in that courtroom, His voice was stronger than any lawyer. Stronger than any argument. Stronger than any lie my mother could tell with a straight face under oath. He spoke from beyond this world and he told the truth. And the truth was enough. I still have that video. Not as evidence anymore. Just as a keepsake. Sometimes late at night, when I'm in that house, I watch the first 30 seconds of it. Just to hear his voice. Just to remember what it sounds like when a person lives with integrity their whole life. He looks right at the camera. He's calm. He says his name. He says the date. And then he says, I want the record to show that I am happy. I've had a good life. I loved my family. And I am at peace with every decision I've made. Every time I hear that, I think, that's the goal. Not the house. Not the land. Not the money. Just to get to the end and be able to say, honestly, that you're at peace with every decision you made. Grandpa Roy got there. I'm still working on it. But I've got a pretty good example to follow. If this story hit you somewhere real, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or had someone try to rewrite your story, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Because sometimes the right story finds you at exactly the right moment.